Hi everyone. Okay, so today we had game 3 of the World Championship match, and it was the best game so far, with many points of interest both on and off the board. It was Carlsen's second game with the white pieces, and he surprised the commentators by opening with knight f3, as he had done in the first game of the match. Vishy again played the same way, with d5, and as in their first game, we saw again both sides fianchetto on the king side with g3, g6, and now the first variation from the first game with Carlsen playing c4, although it's still of course one of the many variations in this opening, which is classified as a neo-Grunfeld because white has played c4 and delayed the development of his queenside knights. Some have said that Carlsen's opening choice indicates he's a little intimidated by Anand's preparation, but it's important to note that Anand knows many lines of the Catalan, a very similar opening, extremely well, as we've seen many games of that opening in previous World Championship matches, most notably against Topalov. Thus it would not follow that Carlsen is playing knight f3 in order to avoid prep or surprise Anand somehow, which he can only really do by playing offbeat lines as he did in the first game. In any case, we're going into a structurally different game because Carlsen is delaying moving his d-pawn in the opening. So anyway, Anand now captured the pawn with d takes c4, which leads to a more open game and gives white's light square bishop a lot more scope from g2. So black has surrendered the center a little, but white will have to use up time in order to get the pawn back. So Carlsen now threw in a check with queen a4, and Anand answered with knight c6. If bishop d7, then just queen takes c4, and he gets the pawn back straight away. So knight c6, and now bishop g2, and this has the immediate idea of playing knight e5, exploiting a pin on this knight. The knight, the bishop, and the queen are going to be attacking it, and it's going to give black some problems to solve. So bishop g7 just stops that straight away. So now knight c3 is normal development, and here Anand played e5, which the computers didn't like 100%, but you know, whilst it's true that it's a little weakening, it's hard not to feel that black must be very close to equal already here. As in the first game of the match, Carlsen's choice of opening didn't put any pressure on Anand. So Carlsen played queen takes c4, winning the pawn back, and it's clear that after Anand's d takes c4, the opening of the c file is something for white to base his play around, whilst black can hope to do something with the d file. So it's similar in some respects to a reversed Sicilian defense. So now Anand played knight g e7. His e pawn is in need of support, and playing the knight to e7 instead of what you might expect f6 also gives the option of f5 for, you know, initiative on the king side, and there's actually quite a deep kind of understanding is clear here with knight e7 instead of knight f6. You'll see why as the game progresses. So both sides now castled, and Carlsen continued with d3. So you know, everything's developed, everything is working nicely in the white position, but there's just no direct threats or anything like that at the moment. One idea for white here is to play knight e4 to c5 and be attacking b7 in conjunction with the bishop on g2, and he can also play bishop e3, one of his rooks to c1, and b4. You know, a minority attack. He's got 2 against 3 here on the queen side, and you know, the attack will shake up the queen side a little bit and try and create some weaknesses to attack, either weak pawns or weak squares in the black position. So Vishy now played h6 to prevent any white pieces coming to g5. He wants to play bishop e6, you know, developing the bishop with tempo against the queen, but it's no good if, you know, white can move his queen to a square that comes with tempo, for example b5 attacking b7, and after black does something about that, knight g5 is going to harass the bishop on e6. So that's one of the reasons h6 was played first. So Carlsen answered with bishop d2. It's a different idea to the bishop e3 and minority attack idea. You'll see what the idea is in a second. Anand now centralized immediately with knight d4. So he's immediately using the d4 square and the semi-open d file for play. So, Carlsen played knight takes d4, and after e takes d4 he played knight d4, which is, something he probably would have done anyway, because he wants to get a knight to c5 in order to add pressure to b7, as I said, and it's just a strong square. So Vishy blunted both that idea and any c file pressure now with c6, and Carlsen continued with bishop b4, which is what he was planning with bishop d2. And this is easy to understand because it's pinning the knights. The rook is gonna fall, and it also aims to exploit the freshly weakened d6 square, because c6 has been played, so now white can plant a piece here, ideally. And black has to keep an eye on the d4 pawn on a long-term basis, and white should be able to have ongoing pressure here against the black queen side and the center. But despite that, at least according to the computers, bishop b4 was not the best move here, and the counterintuitive queen c1 was preferred. So immediately this attacks h6. It's going to take, you would think that after moving the queen out, one of the rooks is going to come to the c file, but the engines think otherwise. So there are other things to consider here, as opposed to what I was just saying, like moving a rook to the c file in conjunction with the queen, maybe trying to use c5 and so on. There's more direct kind of things that can be done. For example, like knight f5 could be played by black now to defend h6. This is one of the reasons knight e7 was preferred over knight f6. So now a4 can be played, and white can undergo this minority attack. And play might continue rook e8, a5, say a6, just to stop that attack in its tracks, but it comes at the cost of weak squares. So now white can play bishop b4, and the idea is simply to swoop in on these dark squares, as well as attacking d4 with bishop c5. And this is definitely preferable and stronger to the way that Carlsen played it, at least according to the engines. I would never dare to contradict Carlsen's play, of course. To pretend to understand it better than he does. So bishop b4 anyway is what he played. So bishop e6 is forcing back the queen. So now Carlsen played queen c1. But this order of moves isn't as strong for white, and after bishop d5 it's clear that Anand is actually playing very, very well here, taking control of the position, and Carlsen definitely hasn't played as accurately as possible. So he now continued with a4. It's the same idea of the minority attack, but he's got the moves and the play in the wrong order. So next came b6, which is threatening to play c5 next, and also given the option of b5 in response to a5. So Carlsen now played bishop takes e7, which the commentators felt may have been a slight admission that he had the worst position here. After queen takes e7, black has the bishop pair, as well as pressure on the e2 pawn down the e file, and this is definitely enough to work with in order to enjoy a slight middle game advantage. So a5, Carlsen continues the minority attack, and Anand answered with the rook a b8, not wanting to give Carlsen the option to trade a pair of rooks, and also giving himself the option of rook takes b6 in the event of a takes b6 with pressure on the b2 pawn. One thing to note here as well. If instead f5, hoping to win, the e2 pawn, black gets into trouble after knight d2, and if queen takes e2, now rook e1 and queen g4. If instead queen takes d3, bishop f1, the queen is trapped. No squares. So queen g4 would be correct, Now a takes b6, a takes b6, forcing line. Rook takes 8, rook takes 8, bishop takes d5 check, c takes d5. Black gets double pawns, but also after queen c6, attacking the rook and b6 pawn and the d5 pawn. White is going to get the pawn back and end up with a better position. He's got control of the e file, and now it's black who has the misplaced queen. So rook a b8. So now Carlsen played rook e1, protecting e2, and Anand continued with the rook f c8, just safeguarding this weak c6 pawn. Is backward on the open file, and Carlsen now opened the a file. A takes b6, a takes b6. So he does now have control of the a file, and so he's fighting for his share of the board, but black is still better here. So Carlsen continued with queen f4, again aiming to try and exploit this weak d6 square. Ultimately Carlsen is a positional player, and this provoking of c6 and the weakening of d6 appears to be what he was playing against anyway. And Anand was just having none of this and stubbornly replied with rook d8, just controlling that square equally now. So Carlsen continued with h4, preventing g5, which might have been one of black's attacking ideas on the king side. However, this gave Anand time for king h7, protecting h6, so bishop e5 is possible, which indeed is what was played. After knight d2, Carlsen wants to trade light square bishops, maybe hoping for a knight against bishop endgame, but Anand doesn't have to allow it, and indeed he did not. Play bishop e5 now, and after the only reasonable move, queen g4, he played h5, and after queen h3, bishop e6, where Carlsen answered queen h1. It's a very unorthodox maneuver, but it does have a concrete positional idea in attacking this weak c6 pawn, a weakness that he created with the minority attack. So the logic is clear, and white retains a different positional advantage after c5, as opposed to attacking the c6 pawn. Now that c5 is played, his control of the a file is absolute, because now he's got total control of a8, bishop and the queen and the rook, but most importantly the bishop, so a black rook can never move there, and unless black takes several moves to challenge this bishop first. So Carlsen has definitely gained something from this maneuver, but it's a double-edged situation because his queen is otherwise inactive on this square on h1. Okay, that's the end of part 1.